Hey everyone, Screenplay Archaeology host KiramidHead here. Just wanted to get some plugs out of the way before the new episode starts. We have now come under the umbrella of Fandom Live Media, which is also the home of the Table Reads podcast, which is a fellow unproduced script podcast, where they read said scripts out in full over several episodes. So if you like this subject matter and you're curious about a different format for it, definitely check those guys out. Not the least reason which is because you'll be paying tribute to my new podcast overlords, and that can only have a benefit. Also, check out the Shelved Film podcast, which covers similar subject matters. They're not tied in with us, but I want you to go check them out. I want to make that recommendation because I'm just a nice guy like that. And as usual, be sure to check us out on social media on Facebook, Tumblr, and Twitter. We're on almost every means of listening to podcasts. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, a bunch of other places, especially now that I'm on a new platform which can distribute it to a whole ton of different places. So be sure to check out Spotify, Google Podcasts, stuff like that as well. And also a couple of things I want to throw in at the end. We do have a Patreon page. There's not much there. I can't really think of a rewards tier at the moment. And also, I have a Discord server that's been put together for a while, so if you want to show up and try that, as long as you're not an asshole, nothing will happen to you. You won't get kicked out. Just follow the rules. You'll be good. Check that link out down below. And with that, enjoy the episode. All right, everyone. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Screenplay Archaeology podcast. I am your host, KiramidHead, and tonight I will be covering a project that has been fairly well talked about over the years, but the script hasn't really gotten out to any real extent. Like, there was one article about it, but this is a project that has been kind of speculated about and asked about ever since it kind of went under back in 2009, and that is John Logan's script for Gore Verbinski's Bioshock movie. Now, this is one I've been on the lookout for a while and only just recently got it, but I was very excited to do so. And for years, there was this fake script out there, which was floating around, which I had seen a couple times. And it was very obviously a fake because I just remember reading through like a couple pages of it and kind of skimming through it. And I just remember it would be like, a scene from the game happens, only we have the main character who doesn't really talk in the game going, fuck, every time something happens. I remember that. But no, I finally got the legitimate article thanks to one of my friends in the script trading community, and I'm going to talk about it with you here tonight. Now, Bioshock is one of my favorite video game franchises of all time, and all three games in the series fall under are amongst my all-time favorite games. So it's one that's very special to me, so that's why I was very much looking forward to this. Now, the first game, it was one of the first games I owned for the PS3, and it probably was for a lot of people because it came out in 2007, not long after that generation came out, but it was for me, and I actually didn't get that generation until much later, like a few years after a lot of people did. I didn't get it till 2010, and I asked for my birthday that year purely so I could play Silent Hill Homecoming. Yeah, I'm really weird that way when you think about it. Yeah, I got for Homecoming. A lot of people are going to be kind of like raising their eyebrows at that, but whatever. But it was among like the first 4 games I owned for it. And it's just an incredible little game where you're exploring that undersea city of Rapture and just the enemies, just the exploration and like piecing together the story from the audio diaries about how this city was formed. It was supposed to be this great thing, but it fell apart for all these reasons. It's really cool kind of, pulling those threads together and figuring out what the deal was with Rapture. And I like the gameplay. I just replayed the game, so this is pretty fresh in my head, but a lot of people will say that it hasn't aged well and that the gameplay hasn't held up. And I do agree to an extent that the sequels improved by, allowing you to use both hands, because like your left hand has the powers, which are the plasmids, and your right hand uses the guns. And you can only have one of those out at one time, so it can be a little bit cumbersome in the first game, but it's not a huge problem for me taking the first game on its own. Like, I mean, for example, I'd say I was in the mood for Bioshock 2, played that, and then went back to Bioshock, it would be much more noticeable. But I don't really have a problem with it in the game in itself. And the other But the criticism I do agree with is that it does drop off a bit at the 2/3 mark because it basically just turns into a really, really, really long fetch quest where if they had maybe cut a few steps of that part out, it would be a bit more tolerable. Or if you had like more going on than just a fetch quest for those sections, they could have, patched it together a little bit better. But I still think it's an enjoyable game to play through, even for those last few parts. The one part of the game I just do not enjoy, and it's another criticism I do agree with, and that's the escort quest right at the end, which is awful purely because you're escorting the little sister, and we'll talk about that as we go along if you don't know Bioshock, because y'all will have to get into that in the script. But, you're escorting her along, and she has the same 3 phrases that she keeps spouting out over and over and over again. One of which is calling you a slowpoke when you are like 10 times faster than she is, and half the time I'm like ahead of her. And I also don't like the fact about how like it seems to be purely luck-based if she dies or not, because it doesn't matter if she dies, because you can go just get another one. But it seems like it's completely random from playthrough to playthrough if you actually get her, if you can get it with just the first one or not. And it's just an annoying part of the level to go through. And that leads into Bioshock 2, which infamously enough, it wasn't made by Irrational Games. It was made by 2K Marin. And I actually think Bioshock 2 is a really, really good game as well. And gameplay-wise, they improved it a lot because they gave you the use of both hands. And while the escort quest function, that whole thing kind of comes back and is a huge part of the game, it is so much better because you're carrying the little sister on your shoulder. And so that makes it better, and they don't die anywhere near as easily as they do in that area at the end of the first game. So it's much less of a headache, and you can get rid of them anytime you want, basically, by going to an event. So that's good. And the way the first game was a deconstruction of objectivism, this game kind of brings in collectivism as the philosophy of the villain, whom I think is really good. A lot of people don't like Lamb. And I like how another thing the game does better is the moral choice system, because in the first game, it was something that I think the publisher insisted on in Irrational. They just kind of threw it in there at the last minute. So in the first game, it's basically you're either a saint or you're a child murdering bastard. There is no middle ground. Whereas in the second game, it's a much more nuanced approach, and I think that's really good. And I think the story is really good because, while it does have some of those big ideas in there, like with the collectivism thing, it's much more of a personal story about the relationship between the big daddy and the little sister, Subject Delta and Eleanor. And I think that's all really well handled. And it's a game where it just seems to have had, especially when it came out, I think it's been a bit reassessed since then, but especially when it came out, people had this weird pretentious reaction to it where it's like, how dare they make this game? How dare they, make a game they made this for money. Why would we want to go back to Rapture? And I'm like, they made a good game. Chill. What does it matter? And then you see people saying that, oh, the gameplay is amazing, but the story is crap. And I think the story is actually really good. And that ending is actually kind of, it's heartwarming and kind of tear-jerking. I won't spoil it for anybody who hasn't played it, but no, I think Bioshock 2 is really good. I think it does a good job of going back to Rapture and exploring a different side of it, because you're seeing the working man's sort of area of Rapture. Because in the first game, you're seeing all the big extravagant areas where like the upper class would hang out. You're seeing all those places, whereas in Bioshock 2, you're going to like the slums and like the red light district and the prison. And there's the amusement park level, which is awesome. One criticism I will give for that game is that the first hour just kind of feels like Bioshock again, and it isn't as good, but it gets really great once you get past that. And another criticism I'll give it is that the early build of the game that they announced, where they said that, because there's these new enemies called Big Sisters in the game who are essentially little sisters who grew up and now are enemies, and they wear like kind of like Big Daddy suits, but not exactly. The original version they announced was that there was going to be one big sister who would periodically show up and fight you, kind of like, I guess, like Pyramid Head in Silent Hill 2. And I would have preferred that to there just being like all these random big sisters who eventually will show up and you will have to fight them. And it would have been more interesting, I think, but it is what it is. And I still think the game is really, really good. And the DLC that came with it, Minerva's Den, that's a cool little add-on as well. And then that takes us to the third game, which is Bioshock Infinite, which was a game I was incredibly hyped for. And once again, it is a game I do very much enjoy. It is among my favorites of all time. And the new city they introduce you to and the characters and everything. I'm not going to go too deeply into it because it's not as relevant to the script, but it is a really, really good game, I think. And I liked how it was different. I do think it does stumble in a couple places. Like, it is a game I do get kind of tired of a little bit by the end. I think it does drag on a bit, but not hugely so. And the 2-weapon limit just didn't really add anything to the gameplay. It was just sort of there. But other than that, I do really enjoy the game. And the 2 little story-based DLCs, Burial at Sea, those are also pretty good. I have criticisms of them here and there, but overall, I think they're a worthwhile addition to the series. I mean, weird things like because you go back to Rapture in those, and they put some of the infinite mechanics in Rapture, which don't really work in that setting. Like, there's this thing when you're in Colombia, because you're in a city in the sky, and you have like a sky hook where you can ride on a rail with your hook from one area to the next. And they put that in Rapture, and that doesn't really work for me. That just feels weird. But, other than that, and there's some story things they do in the second part of Burial at Sea where I'm kind of like, okay, you're getting a little, ahead of yourself here with certain things. But other than that, I do really, really like that entire series of games. Now, there's been talk recently, rumors of there being a Bioshock 4 that 2K is going to work on. Now, Irrational, who did the first game and they did Infinite, obviously they're not going to do it because they don't exist anymore. I don't think 2K Marin exists anymore either. I think they might have shut down as well. So it's I'm a little trepidatious that like it's not going to be made by any of the same people. But Bioshock 2 was a different team, and they did a really good job with that. So maybe Bioshock 4 can work as well. And it is supposed to be bringing you to a new setting. It's not taking you back to Rapture to pander to a certain generation of fans, which is what it would really feel like if they went back to Rapture again, especially after Burial at Sea Part 2. But I am curious as to what they do with that. Although I think 2K is one of the publishers as, hiking the price for the next generation of games. So not so big on that. But that might be one of the games I will for sure get in the next generation if it happens, just because I love the series so much. And I would be curious to see what the new direction for it is. Now, the movie was something that was announced not long after the first game actually came out, because the first game was 2007, and the movie deal was finished in 2008. And Take-Two Interactive, who's like the umbrella that the different 2K studios are under, they got the rights to do a Bioshock movie in early 2008. And there was apparently some sort of like specific deal that Take-Two had put together that was supposedly structured to make sure the movie actually got made. And they specifically pointed to the Halo movie as an example, which Universal was apparently also involved with. And that is like an entirely darkly hilarious development thing if I ever do that episode, because that's just Microsoft being really, really stupid. That's basically the story of the Halo movie, is Microsoft being dumb and not understanding how movies work. But that's a whole other story. So they got the rights together, and they got, Gore Verbinski to direct and John Logan to write the script. Now we're going to get to play the IMDb game. So Gore Verbinski, I weirdly have seen of the bulk of his movies. Mouse Hunt is, I really, really like that movie ever since I first saw it. I saw that movie in the theaters when I was a little kid, and I've always liked that one. Really fun little dark comedy. The Mexican, I've seen maybe about half an hour of that also when I was a kid. And I remember being really intrigued by it, but I never saw the whole thing. And so there's just things in that have kind of stuck in my head, like the flashback to the duel in the Old West. Like, I kind of want to see that movie. I kind of want to see the rest of it, but I never have. The Ring, which is a movie that scared the fuck out of me when I was 10 years old, and I still very much appreciate. I like the original Japanese movie more, but I do think The Ring is a very good remake. And of course, the thing that Gore Verbinski will always be associated with, Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, which is just a fantastic action-adventure movie. That was a movie that defied all expectations because everybody thought that thing was going to tank. Johnny Depp was the weird indie movie actor, and it was based on a ride, and we're like, what's that going to be? And then the movie ended up being really, really good. And it still is. I need to go back and watch that again because it's been a long time. And the franchise as a whole has kind of tarnished it somewhat, but I kind of want to, go back to it. He did The Weatherman with Nicolas Cage, which I've never seen, but I always confuse it with The Family Man, which I have, and I hate The Family Man, but that's not relevant. And then there's the Pirates of the Caribbean 2 and 3, which I think are mistakes largely, and I don't really blame Verbinski for that. I think that was Disney thinking they were going to get, because they saw, the successive trilogies like The Matrix and The Lord of the Rings and the Star Wars prequels, and they went, we want our own Lord of the Rings, essentially. So they took what was a nice little light action adventure movie that was long, but still good, and went, we're going to make an epic out of it, and we're going to make this 2-part, epic story to make a trilogy, and it just didn't work. Like, Dead Man's Chest is watchable. Like, it's not great. It's got lots of problems. It has what I call, the Empire syndrome, where it tries way too hard to be like Empire Strikes Back and be the dark one. But it's still okay. At World's End is a goddamn mess, because they didn't have a finished script when they were making it, and you can see them rewriting the movie as you watch it with all the changing of sides that happens in it. And it was a mess, but it was kind of inevitable because of the way they did it. And they did the animated movie Rango, which I've always heard really, really good things about that movie, and I've never actually seen it. And that was also written by John Logan, so I want to check that one out eventually. And then, oh boy, The Lone Ranger, which is the only movie on this list that I've talked about so far where I'm like, I actually hate this movie, because I was on vacation and the family and we went to see that, and like, we were in Chattanooga and we stopped in to watch that while we were on vacation. I'm like, oh, and I was just miserable for 2.5 hours. Like, I was not happy. That movie is just fucked up and not in a good way. And his most recent film was A Cure for Wellness, which I have the DVD of, and I've been meaning to watch it because I've heard it's absolutely batshit insane. And I wanted to get it watched before I recorded this, but I just wanted to get this done. I'd taken too long, so I haven't watched it yet, but I want to. I hear it completely loses its goddamn mind and becomes a different movie in the third act, so I definitely want to check this out. And that's it. Like, I mean, he was attached to the Gambit movie, but that's not happening anymore, and I already did that episode. And to move on to John Logan's IMDb page, his film credits include Bats, which I rented years ago and I remember nothing about, and I'm skipping most of the TV credits. Any Given Sunday, which people seem to either love or hate, so I want to give that one a watch eventually. Gladiator, which I really like. It gets a lot of flack now. The Time Machine remake, which interestingly enough, like a good chunk of that movie was directed by Gore Verbinski, because the original director had like physically collapsed or something from exhaustion. I remember reading about that. Star Trek Nemesis, which is not one of the good Star Trek movies. I'll leave it at that. It's really only worth watching for early Tom Hardy. Last Samurai, I just saw recently. Really, really liked that movie more so than I thought I would. The Aviator, not Scorsese's best and not Leo's best, but still pretty good. Sweeney Todd, one of the last like really good Tim Burton movies. A few things I haven't seen. I've not seen Red. I think that's no, that's a different Red. I thought it was the Brian Cox Dead Dog movie, but no, it's not. Rango, which I just mentioned. Coriolanus, which I think I saw the trailer for that and went, ooh, what's that? And then I never saw it, but that's a Shakespeare movie, which looked really good. I just haven't. Directed by Ray Fiennes. Interesting. Yeah, I should probably check that out. That's one I want to check out too. Hugo, a movie I would say is among Scorsese's best. That was a surprisingly good movie, because I walked into that not knowing anything about it and was knocked off my feet by it. Skyfall, one of my favorite Bond movies. Spectre, not one of my favorite Bond movies. Genius, which I haven't seen. He was the showrunner for Penny Dreadful, which I loved the first season and got bored halfway through the second, and I heard it got really bad in the third season and then ended horribly. So I'm not really motivated to go watch the rest. Alien Covenant, which I didn't like, but that was going to be bad no matter who wrote it, because Ridley Scott just seems to have weird ideas about Alien that aren't appealing to me. And then there was the Penny Dreadful spin-off series, which he apparently is also involved in, and I've heard nothing about, I've heard very little about that. I think it got canceled, actually, so maybe it wasn't that great. So yeah, that's John Logan. I should also mention that he did write one of my favorite scripts that I've covered on this show, and that's his version of I Am Legend that he also wrote for Ridley Scott, which I think is fantastic. And I should mention, I got another draft he did, which I thought was even better. So I got to do a follow-up episode down the line. That, and I got another Protasevich draft, which was also pretty interesting. And that's another episode which I want to do a follow-up on just because I got a lot more information about that project, like a year after I did it, and I've been kicking myself ever since then because that episode just feels like really amateurish to me now because of that. But, it is what it is. So the script is, and this isn't dated because it doesn't have a cover page on it, but the basic plot of this thing before I jump into detail is it's essentially an adaptation of the first game where you have Jack, who's a guy who gets on a plane and it crashes in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and he finds a lighthouse and he ends up inside a bathysphere and he goes down to the underwater city of Rapture, which was supposed to be this idealized retreat under the ocean, which has since decayed and fallen apart, and the people have all gone insane because of drugs and other things. It's about him sort of finding his way in the city and surviving and, finding out what went down. So it's the same. It's basically the plot of the first game. And one thing I've seen people say is that they would like a movie about the rise and fall of Rapture, so the themes could still be there, but it would be a different thing. And I would be down. I'd actually be interested in that. But personally, I'm much more interested in seeing that decayed, decrepit Rapture that I love from the games getting brought to life on the big screen. So I like what this script does more. And if you want the rise and fall of Rapture, I would highly recommend reading the book Bioshock Rapture by John Shirley, which is actually pretty good from what I remember. I don't have it anymore, but it was a nice little expansion of the history of Rapture. Like he took the information from the games and some of the peripheral stuff and then kind of expanded it himself. That was actually a pretty good book. So I recommend you track that down. Some really creepy Sandra Cohen stuff in there that's way more fucked up than what you get in the game. Like there's a bit with an octopus, which is just like, wow. But I'll leave that for now. And so going off my notes, we go into the script. And so it opens at a college graduation ceremony in 1960. So it's keeping the same time frame of the story, while a commencement speaker talks about how the graduates are going to make decisions that will determine the future. So we're kind of establishing the theme here of it takes the idea you get in the game a little bit about the idea of free will and making a choice, and it makes that kind of the main theme of the story for this version. So it really focuses in on that, and that's an important thing I want to get out of the way early because that's actually a very key part of why some of the differences in this script are here. And I'll talk about that as I go along. And among all the generically kind of cheerful faces is Jack, who is the only one who seems uncertain about all of this. He sees his parents and Aunt Doreen in the audience, and then we go back to Jack's perfect suburban house where a graduation party is being held in the backyard. And his father and mother, they're entertaining their friends and their guests, and his father is there with some of his work associates, and he's showing off his golf swing, which that's a nice little bit of foreshadowing, if you know the game. And also, I should say, before we get into this, there's going to be heavy spoilers for the first game here, so if you're at all interested in the game, I'm going to keep them out of the way until they come up in the script. But if you're at all interested in the game, definitely go and play it. You know what? Mute the fucking, podcast, let it play out so that it helps my statistics and stuff like that. But, go play the game, then come back and listen. And so, you don't have to do that if you don't want to. You don't have to do the mute part, but I thought that would be a nice little bit of encouragement. But so they're there and he's listening, but he's there listening to his Aunt Doreen prattle on about some sort of hosting duty. And that's when he notices there's something glinting light at the bottom of the pool, but we can't quite make it out. And his dachshund, Rusty, notices it as well and starts barking at it. And Jack tears himself away and forces himself to focus on the conversation. And then the next morning, Jack's father is giving him the tour of the firm where he works, and it's described as this Kafkaesque office building with everyone acting like bland, emotionless drones, except for one overweight man in an office who is crying while staring blankly with Scrabble tiles on his desk, and this feeling of just, ugh. I love it. It's like this complete exaggeration of what like mid-century America corporate stuff is like. Like we're getting like the incredibly fucked up version of Mad Men. More so than Mad Men actually was. And also the party scene does remind me a lot of The Graduate, which I thought that was kind of neat. I don't know if that was intentional, but it definitely did remind me of that. And so Jack's father talks about meeting Mr. Ryan from the New York office for lunch soon, who would be able to open doors for Jack at corporate. And he tells Jack about after 10 years, he'll get a special firm ring. And he says, hey, you used to play with this when you were a kid, right? Because he shows him the ring. And he then shows Jack his future office, which is just a small little blank room. And from there, we immediately go to Jack running away through an airport terminal. So he took one look at this job and just went, nope, I am out. Because everyone else is like seemingly like really happy and fitting in with just this perfect vision of, suburbia. And Jack is just seeing all the bad. Like, he doesn't feel like this is for him at all. So he's just running away. And he's asked a stewardess for tea. He gets aboard a flight before it leaves. He asks the stewardess for tea and is about to open a present from his mother. And he's reading the note when he realizes that she brought him coffee instead. And Jack goes to, get her to change the drink to tea, and they begin chatting, and she asks why he picked the flight to Barcelona, and he says, I saw it on a postcard, and he wants to get away because he's feeling about how, like, his entire life is planned out for him. And he talks about he feels like he doesn't really fit in, he feels like his life isn't really real, and he wants to go out and do something real, and do something that he wants to do that's his, and stuff like that. So once again, we're building that theme. And he's even flirting with her a bit. And he seems to be successful in setting up a date when they overnight in London. And she says, oh, it's against the rules. And he's like, hey, haven't you ever broken rules before? And it's like, he's just so thoroughly charming her on this plane. It's kind of cool seeing that side of Jack. And so Jack returns to his seat and he begins reading the note his mother attached to his present. He starts reading it again, and that causes him to flash back to he's at dinner at home, and like his father, his parents, and his relatives are there, and he's announcing that he's going to leave. And we see him telling his parents this when the wine blows from his glass like the wind hit it, and the entire place begins to vibrate. Roaring sounds are heard, and flashes of images from the earlier scenes are shown. And the stewardess appears next to him in the dining room, asking him if he wants coffee or tea. And the windows shatter, and the room floods with water. It then moves to Jack underwater with the flaming wreckage sinking around him. I love this opening because it's taking the opening of the game where Jack is on the plane and giving it context and turning it into kind of a mindfuck. It's a really great, creepy opening to the script. And he swims to the surface, seeing that the plane has crashed over the ocean, and he spots the blinking beacon of a lighthouse in the distance and swims for it, and he pulls himself ashore, seemingly unharmed. And he actually is kind of like knocked out by this because the way it reads is that he's laying there for a while before he finally gathers his energy and stands up and notices that the lighthouse instead of looking like a normal lighthouse, it's more architectural the way it's described. Because, in the game you swim to the lighthouse, it's this big tower in the middle of the ocean. Like, it's not a traditional lighthouse. So thankfully he's not going to run to Robert Pattinson masturbating to a mermaid figure. And so Jack climbs the stairs and enters the lighthouse, finding that it is exquisitely decorated in the Art Deco style, very much in the games where and the Art Deco style, not only was it, period appropriate for when Rapture was constructed in 1945, but it was also, because the game was deconstructing objectivism, it was kind of nodding to the cover art to all the Ayn Rand novels with the statues and stuff. And so he continues on, descending some stairs, and he takes notice of a banner that reads, "No gods or kings, only man." So there's no gigantic, creepy Andrew Ryan statue in the room. So that's a plus. And at the bottom, he finds a high-tech doorway leading to what looks like an elevator car. And not seeing any other option, Jack steps inside, and then the chamber shuts itself and descends, revealing to be a bathysphere descending towards the ocean floor. So yeah, this is pretty faithful to the opening of the game. A video screen pops up, and Jack actually kind of jumps at this, and that was funny to me because I've seen people play this game on YouTube blind, and the projector screen popping up in front of them actually freaks them out a little bit. That was funny. So that was funny to me in this context. And there's a pre-recorded message plays with Andrew Ryan, the founder of Rapture, giving a speech, and it's almost word for word from the game. It's almost exactly the same. And we then get the reveal of Rapture, a glittering city on the bottom of the ocean. And Ryan's video is interrupted by the Irish accented voice of Atlas, who tells Jack not to listen to Ryan as well to stay put, but he gets cut off before he can finish what he's saying. So the bathysphere comes to a stop, and it's approached by an engineer who tells Jack to push the decompression button, and he does so. And as the decompression counts down, and that's interesting that they put this in here because in the game, you go down and you don't worry about decompression at all. Like, it's not even like brought up. So that's interesting. So it's an interesting detail to put in here. And also there is concept art I've seen online of the interior of the bathysphere, and it looks really cushy and nice, like even more so than in the game. Like it looks like decked out. It's crazy. It's not one of the things that's going to be in the thumbnail, but it's worth pointing out. And so it counts down what's described as an unclear figure with a female voice comes into view and attacks the engineer, slashing at him with a hook, spraying blood on the bathysphere window, and then the door slides open and Jack waits stunned before finally emerging. And once again, it's written in such a way that implies that he is standing there for a while before he comes out. And I like how that's done here because it gives you a real sense that Jack is actually affected by what's going on. He finds both the figure and the engineer's body gone, and so he walks through the decaying docking chamber, and he follows the sound of the song "I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire" playing on a scratchy record somewhere deeper into Rapture. And it's an amazingly amusing coincidence that this song is playing in this script, because the last script I talked about in the last episode, the Highlander episode, the Alex C draft, the Kurgan is whistling this song or humming it throughout like a good chunk of that script. It's like, what a coincidence. I did not plan this. And so Jack follows a glass tunnel surrounded by sea life on the outside, and it specifies like a shark passes him. And he sees how strewn with debris the city is. And he enters an atrium full of glowing advertising signs, seeing a vending machine selling something called plasmids, and finding an empty syringe gun on the ground. And he follows the music up a staircase to its source, which is the Fort Frolic nightclub. Now, this is a difference from the game. Fort Frolic was like an actual area full of like, it's like the entertainment district for the upper crust of Rapture, where it's like this whole area you have to travel through, and they've kind of condensed it down to just this one nightclub. But that's okay, because there's not time in the movie to like go to every single area. So condensing it down and having like a nice little nod there for the fans is pretty cool. And it's been abandoned and trashed with a banner for New Year's 1958 still hanging. Jack lifts the needle off the record, stopping the song, and that's when he notices a man in a tuxedo sitting at a table. He approaches the man, stepping on broken records as he does, and that just sounds like a really good way to build tension with sound design, that Jack is having to step on these things as they break, going and he's finding that he's dead and his pockets having been rifled through, and and anyone who's played the game knows what that's like. There are Scrabble tiles on the table, some of which read, "Would you kindly," but Jack doesn't notice this, so that's a little thing for the audience to possibly pick up on. And if you've played the game, you know what that means, which we will be getting to. And Jack then hears a metallic squeaking sound and goes to investigate, finding a woman with a baby carriage with her back to him down a long corridor, and the squeaking is coming from her rocking the carriage. And so this is once again based on a scene in the game. And Jack speaks to her, and he's like approaching her like slowly from a distance. Yeah, Jack speaks to her and she stops rocking it, but she doesn't look at him, so he slowly approaches and he gets very close to her, and that's when she turns around. And she's looking disheveled and not all there mentally, and she's saying that they took her baby. And Jack looks into the carriage, and sadly, unlike the game, there's not a revolver in there. It's just dried blood. And the woman stops, her demeanor changing before a spider splicer, that unclear figure from before, suddenly descends from the ceiling and shreds the woman with her hooks. So this plays a little bit differently, because in the game, the woman of the baby carriage just turns around and attacks you, or if you can attack her first. But here she like turns around, she's looking at Jack, and she starts saying some things to him, like some kind of motherly things. And then she just gets, boom, killed by the spider splicer, who is a character from the game. Like there's a bunch of spider splicers, but this one in particular is one that you see her at the bathysphere, and you see her a couple more times, and she eventually comes back and you have to fight her. So she's like a looming presence for a good chunk of the game. And I should say, this is all very creepy and very horror movie in the way it's written. And I like that, because that's something you could look at Bioshock and kind of look past when making a movie, thinking, oh, we can go to the crazy action with the plasmids and the guns. But I like that this script remembers that there is a horror aspect to the game. I think that's cool that they rely on that so much here, because I think that makes like a good it's a good way to approach it for a movie. And so the mutated splicer, dressed in ragged dancer's clothes, lunges at Jack, only to be riddled with gunfire and killed. And this whole sequence, by the way, there is storyboards on this, which you can find on the Bioshock wiki, and they're also not what I included in the thumbnail, but it's still pretty cool to look at. And the gun is held by Atlas, now showing up in person, telling Jack to come with him. So Atlas and Jack, they actually meet face to face in this as opposed to him just being a voice on the radio, which is something that would be necessary for a movie. You actually have characters interacting on screen together. He's telling Jack to come with him, but Jack is having none of it though and walks off, heading back for the bathysphere station. And Atlas is trying to tell Jack that it's impossible to leave that way, and it becomes literally true when the glass tunnel to the station is destroyed by the tail of the crashed plane, letting in a squid before Atlas seals the tunnel shut. And Cthulhu, Jack and I were talking about this, after we did the Highlander episode, we were talking about this. He loves the squid for some reason, and it is really random that the squid just pops in to say hey for like 5 seconds and then is gone. And he said he saw concept art with that squid in it, and I think I've seen it too, but I haven't been able to find it in my research for the actual episode. But that is kind of a funny little moment. There's just a squid that pops in and says, hey, and then they seal the tunnel. Atlas tells Jack that if he wants to escape, come with him. And as they're crossing through what's called a park bubble, which is an artificial park underneath a huge glass dome that shows off the skyline of Rapture, he tells Jack that his family is waiting in a sub at Neptune's bounty, so this is following the game somewhat. And that's the only way out now. And he also hands Jack a gun, who accepts it after some protest. Now, the park bubble is sort of a sort of, nod to Arcadia from the games. Only in Arcadia, the trees are real, and that's where Rapture's air comes from. That's where their air supply is filtered in from. Here, it's like this fake, like AstroTurf, false trees, stuff like that. And I kind of wish they just called it Arcadia and made the point. And I kind of wish they just did that, even if it isn't exactly Arcadia. Like the Fort Frolic nightclub, it kind of makes the same point while it's being different enough and fitting into, the length of a movie. And also, it would have been nice to maybe put in like a public service announcement from Andrew Ryan here and use like the story he tells about the forest that he owned and burned down when the government seized it from him to sort of give you a little bit more character for Andrew Ryan along the way. That's something they could have put in here. But yeah, that's just some thoughts I had about the way the park bubble is used in this thing. We go back here like 3 times too. It gets kind of silly. And so they avoid a college football player splicer who is assembling bombs, and he's going, put me in, coach, put me in, coach. And Atlas is then, he points out the lights of Ryan's penthouse atop a tall tower, which is visible through the dome. So that's, setting up for later. And he then moves Jack behind some rubble as a bride and groom splicers enter, arguing a bit before the bride guns the groom down. And this is one thing I like about this, is that John Logan with this script, he really gets down the feel and the voice of the splicers here. Like, they definitely feel almost right off the page isn't the right word, but right off the screen from the video game. Like, they really are handled well in this thing. Just the creepy ways in which they go about muttering like random phrases that probably meant something to them before, and the way they interact with each other, because there are couple splicers in the game here and there. Like one of the first ones you run into, probably a lot of people remember this, is that when you're going through the restaurant early on, there's like 2, you could hear them arguing, and then when you kill the husband, who's like, she's in another room, like they're arguing back and forth, you like bash the husband over the head and kill him, and then you hear the wife go, Charlie, where you going? In like a Harley Quinn voice. I always remember that. Like, that stuck with me for years. I couldn't explain to you why. But yes, they definitely has the feel of the splicers down in this, which I think is fantastic. And Jack gasps at what he sees, and this almost leads the bride to their location. It's this really creepy, tense bit, which if directed right, could have been really cool, where the bride is like listening, looking around, and she's sniffing the air. Like, and man, that could have been really cool to see in the movie. Really creepy. Once again, good horror movie atmosphere. But she gets distracted by a milkman splicer who's looting the groom's corpse, and so they start fighting over that. And so Atlas uses this distraction to sneak himself and Jack out of there down a corridor. And Jack is looking out the window, and he comments on how huge Rapture is. And he's not listening as Atlas says that they're all mad for something called Adam. And Atlas talks about how it was supposed to be heaven on earth, and Jack asks what happened, but then Atlas shusses him as they enter an auditorium. And in the auditorium, they're approached by a mad artist named Sander Cohen, who accosts Atlas, asking him for the umber he was promised, and he needs it for painting cherubs. He's like, have you ever tried painting a cherub without umber? And this is a character from the game, and he's given a small scene here, and it's a nice little nod, and they get the feel of the character down pretty well. And Cohen threatens to ring a bell, which we don't know quite what that means yet. But he then notices Jack, saying he needs him to complete his masterpiece. He's just going after him, saying, like, you're the piece of the puzzle. Like, they totally get the feel of this character down. Atlas tries to keep Cohen away, but he won't hear it, and he rings the bell right as Atlas guns him down, and Jack is initially appalled, and then some blood drips on his face, and he looks up at the ceiling. It's covered in corpses with one spot empty, and it's described as being like a twisted Sistine chapel, and there's one space empty, and Atlas is like, no, Cohen was good. That's what Cohen wanted you for. He was going to kill you and put you up there. So it takes the whole idea of Sander Cohen. Yeah, because in the game, Sander Cohen has created this thing that he calls his quad tick, and he wants like these 4 corpses placed into it. Well, it's made out of corpses, and he wants pictures of dead people put into it, and he wants you to go around and help him finish his masterpiece before he lets you leave Fort Frolic, because that's the area he's in. And obviously you can't do all of that in the movie, but it's a nice little... They get the character down, and they give him like a cool, memorable moment, which I feel like is good enough. And he does have like there's like bodies strewn throughout Fort Frolic in the game, which are covered in plaster and posed. So they do have like the traits of the character down here. However, the bell Cohen has rung has attracted a lot of the nearby splicers, including the ones we've seen before. So it's a nice little continuity. You get little splicer characters who recur, which I think is pretty cool. Forcing Jack and Atlas to run. And the chase proceeds down several corridors, Atlas firing away at splicers, killing as many as he can. And that's one thing you'll notice about this script, is that a lot of it takes place in corridors. So there is no bathysphere travel between the different parts of Rapture, which is going to cause me to ask a question later, which we'll get to. Atlas is firing away at splicers, killing as many as he can, and they find themselves in the park bubble again. As they navigate the rubble-strewn park, Jack tries to use his gun, but loses it as he's not used to the recoil, and he gets leaped on by the football player Splicer, who chews his ear off before Atlas guns him down. So there's some nice gruesome violence for you. And it really shows you just how dangerous and crazy these Splicers are in this moment when they finally attack. Like, damn. And they flee down a corridor, and Atlas pulls Jack into a storeroom, barring the door behind them, which won't last long as all the Splicers are currently pounding on it. And he tells Jack to head to Neptune's bounty, and find his family if he doesn't make it, and then pulls out one of the syringe guns, which is full of a glowing blue liquid he calls Adam. Now, Adam, in the game, they're sort of like conflating Adam and Eve, because Eve is the substance that you use to sort of recharge your abilities, your plasmid abilities, and Adam is like the secondary currency you use to buy upgrades, and so they've kind of pushed them into one, which is fine by me, because the differences between them is really just in the name of gameplay mechanics, and it doesn't really matter to the narrative. So making them one thing is perfectly fine. And Atlas tries to get Jack to take it, but Jack refuses, and Atlas finally injects half of it into himself, which has a visible effect on him. It makes him stronger and more aggressive from what we can see. And then he tells Jack to kindly take the drug. He says, "Would you kindly do the drug and head to Neptune's bounty? And be quick about it," before tossing Jack another gun and running out into the corridor to fight through the splicers. And the splicer breaks into the storeroom, and Jack fires off the gun at it, missing with every shot, and then he doesn't see much of a choice, so he takes the half-full syringe and injects it into himself, and he actually loses track of time as the atom hits his system. And you get little flashes of the ensuing fight before he comes to in the corridor just outside, surrounded by dead splicers and holding yet another gun. And Jack continues to fight down the corridor and through the park bubble, expertly shooting, killing, and dodging. And he kills the bride splicer, takes her Tommy gun, and he starts using the stock as a club once he runs out of ammo. And he picks up a wrench and starts beating splicers with it after the stock breaks. And that's a nice little nod to the game, where one of the weapons you get, the first one, is a wrench. And he's enjoying the fight even as he brutally beats a minister splicer to death with the wrench. So this is showing you the kind of effect Adam has on you, and the madness it can cause. So here they've kind of, taken Adam and made it almost exclusively a kind of like a steroid, where it like makes you like stronger, faster, more focused, more aggressive. And it does do that in the games. I think they just can, because they talk about it a bit in the Rapture novel. And they've sort of downplayed the plasmid use in this, which there is like in the park bubble, there is a mention of a billboard saying, Winter Blast by Ryan Plasmids, blah, blah, blah. And that's also very much downplayed in terms of like Adam giving you powers, but we do get some of that later on down the line, and I'll have to talk about that then. But for the most part, Adam is used like this. And then Jack stumbles down another corridor as the Adam begins to wear off. And he sees an empty syringe gun, which triggers visions, starting with the shining thing from his pool, which is now revealed to be one of the syringe guns. And he then has visions of his past mixed in with visions of what he has seen in Rapture, followed by super quick flashes of a tiny tiled room with photos on the wall, electroshock equipment, 16mm film, etc., which we haven't seen as of yet. So, little bit of building towards stuff to come. And Jack then blacks out, and as he starts to come back to consciousness, he sees his first little sister squatting over him, one of the iconic parts of the game, and gets just a glimpse of a Big Daddy's enormous metal hand as they walk down together, because she's bending over him, and then she's like, no, this isn't him. It's almost exactly the same as the scene from the game, only there isn't like the bit before with the two splicers kind of hanging over him and then fleeing when the Big Daddy approaches. So that's not here. And so Jack fully comes to in the corridor later, with Andrew Ryan's voice coming over the PA system, monologuing about choice, slavery, and freedom. So we're zeroing in on that theme again. Jack follows a sign pointing towards the medical pavilion, and while Ryan's speech continues, Jack rifles through the pockets of multiple dead corpses looking for Adam because he's desperate for a fix and he's already addicted. He finds some bullets and a gun, but the only syringes are all empty, and in his frustration, Jack bashes open the vending machine, only to find the syringes inside are all empty as well. And I really like this little bit here because there comes a point in the game where you can start getting empty syringes, and it's because they introduced the crafting segments. Yeah, the crafting aspect of the game with the U-Invent machine, and you only need those empty syringes for 3 items, and you end up with like tons of these things in your inventory. And just the feeling of going through, like, searching bodies thinking you're going to find, like, an Eve hypo, and instead you find an empty one. You're like, fuck. Like, the script completely captures that feeling, and I just smiled reading that. Like, the fans in the audience would just get a nice little chuckle out of that. And that's when Ryan, who has been live this whole time, not pre-recorded, addresses Jack directly and by name. He expresses disappointment in Jack, even calling him by name, so I'm jumping ahead of my notes, sorry, and talking about how wonderful Rapture was before it all fell apart. And he asks Jack to come closer to the camera's lens, which is beneath the speaker, but he's silent when Jack asks how Ryan knows him. And we then go to Ryan sitting in shadow at a view screen, saying he looks forward to meeting Jack before Jack shoots the camera. And it's pointed out that the still only vaguely seen Ryan's posture makes him look weary. And that's a nice little moment. I love, like, the segue from him monologuing over the PA and thinking it's a pre-recorded message to it turning out that he's actually watching. That would have been a cool little moment. Jack follows signs pointing to Dr. Steinman's aesthetic ideals and hears voices talking. He finds Steinman and his nurse in an operating room performing plastic surgery on an unseen patient, blood and scraps of flesh lying all around. And yes, they put Steinman in the script and he's awesome. Jack asks for directions on Neptune's bounty, but Steinman starts badgering him about fixing his missing ear, and he's just pulling different severed ears off a table, offering him, like, I can put this one on you, or this one, or this one. I love it. They totally get Steinman down here. He's like, you should be perfect. That's the point of Rapture. And Jack begs off, mentioning that Atlas is waiting for him, and Steinman reacts, like, freaking out, saying that he doesn't do that kind of work anymore. Leave, get out of here. I have too many patients waiting. And as Jack is leaving, he looks into the waiting area, and he sees he's full of malformed, deformed patients who have had too much surgery done to them, waiting for more. Ugh, that's just such a creepy little image there. Like, the fact that, like, Steinman will fuck around with them and they'll come back for more willingly. Ugh, I love that. That's not in the game, but it's perfect. And so Jack leaves and he finds himself in a nursery. And he hears a little sister singing, and he hides, watching as she, has a needle, is extracting something from a corpse. As we find out later on, that's where the atom comes from. And she gets attacked by what's described as a troglodyte splicer, but she screams, causing her Big Daddy to appear on the scene, who shoves the splicer up against the wall and impales him on his drill arm. And this is like the first full glimpse we get at the Big Daddy, before he walks off with the little sister. And so that's a scene from the game, but it takes place in a different area. The nursery almost feels like it's been carried over from the second game, because the second game has little sister nurseries towards the end. The way it's described, it feels more like that than like the little sister area as you see in the first game. And Jack searches the splicer's body, finding a shotgun, some shells, and some potato chips. I love it. The potato chips are from the game. Love it. Which he starts eating before noticing that he's being watched from a ventilation duct. And thankfully, it's not Eugene Toombs. It's a young man named Rudy Pendergast, who's an original character, and he's dressed as a movie usher, and he tells Jack about how the daddies were created by a Nazi bitch named Tenenbaum to protect the little sisters, so we're getting a little bit more game story, and offers to show him the way to Neptune's bounty, and Jack offers him the potato chips, but it seems like Rudy is doing it because he just really wants a friend to talk to, and the character He's not in this a whole lot, and we don't get much from him, but he's really endearing for the little bit that he's in. And he's a nice little addition, I think. And he's leading Jack down the corridor, telling him about how Rapture used to be great before, but then he stops him from going down a turn in the corridor that's protected by gun turrets, and specifically mentioned that the gun turrets are attached to rolling desk chairs, which is another just detail from the games, which I always found really cool, and they put that in here. And he instead shows Jack a secret passage behind the vending machine, and they go that way instead. And so he leads Jack through like the underbelly of Rapture, through like the maintenance tunnels and stuff like that. And this is one of the pieces of concept art that I'm putting in the thumbnail because it specifically reflects a moment from the script where you see Rudy in his, you see them in these tunnels, and Rudy is in his movie usher outfit. And that piece is by Jack Martin. Just want to give credit where credit's due. And there's another piece, the other piece I used, I'll talk about when we get to it. But no, as Rudy leads Jack through the tunnels, he tells Jack about what happened to Rapture, about how the place was great, it was free and you could do whatever you wanted. You were free to, follow your pursuits. And Atlas starts smuggling stuff in, which upset Ryan. And as Adam usage started to get out of control, he clamped down and became more and more fascistic. And then Atlas led a resistance against Ryan, but that only served to make things worse until Rapture erupted into civil war and the society collapsed. And now the two of them are just killing each other after everything has fallen apart. They're trying to kill each other, and they basically become as bad as the other is, the idea you get. That's Rudy's point of view. And Rudy, throughout all of this, he describes everything as in old movie references. And as someone who loves movies, I just got such a kick out of this because he describes Atlas as being like Errol Flynn in Robin Hood, and Ryan is like Basil Rathbone, and Basil Rathbone would make a good Ryan. And he compares things to the Wild West and stuff like that. It's so fun reading this guy's dialogue because it's just such crack to movie fans like me. And you'll notice some stuff got left out of the background here. And I'll have to talk about that later because it's relevant to stuff later in the plot, but that is a big thing with this script because of the focusing in on the different themes compared to the game. And it does set it apart from the game, which is something you want to a degree as an adaptation. But it's something I'm going to have to it's because it ties into a huge plot point later on. I'm going to have to really dive into it there. And then Rudy and Jack emerge from the tunnels in the hallway with a clown-painted vending machine. That bastard. I hate that clown. That's full of Adam syringes. And Jack, approaches, but Rudy stops him, showing him that it's trapped with two turrets, which are set off by an electronic eye. And that clown is so annoying. The Circus of Values clown. It's voiced by Ken Levine, the director of the games, which is hilarious to me. But it's such a bastard because you will buy it. You'll buy stuff from it. And if you stop buying stuff from it, you'll be like, come back when you get some money, buddy. It's like, fuck you. Fuck the clown. But it's fun that it's here. And they then move through a domed auditorium where a bunch of splicer couples are engaging in a dance marathon, not paying attention to them. And I'm like, is it the dance marathon from Godzilla versus the Sea Monster? Basically, it's where you dance for as long as you can. Whoever is still dancing after everyone else falls down from exhaustion, they win. That's what a dance marathon is. And that's a real creepy scene in that the splicers aren't attacking, but they're still acting really weird. But they're also doing something kind of normal at the same time. I love that. I guess it's like an uncanny valley effect. I really, really like that because it shows that they still go about their lives in some fashion, even though they're all creepy and weird. And next, they end up in an area that's a recreation of 1950s suburbia, complete with astroturf lawns, fake plants, and a painted backdrop sky. And the way this place is described, and it's original to this script. I think it's kind of a cool idea. It's something that they probably would have done if they thought of it for the game. And it just makes me, I half expect to see Indiana Jones come running and jump in a fridge. And second, it makes me think of the Truman Show in a lot of ways, which is not a bad thing to be reminded of. And neither is the other thing, because I actually don't mind that movie. Unpopular opinion, I know. And Rudy says they're going to take a shortcut through a house where they meet Mrs. Beasley, a stereotypical 1950s housewife described as June Cleaver on crack, who clearly isn't all there in the head, and she offers them tater tots as well as cookies because she has piles and piles of baked goods. And Rudy warns Jack away from them, which is significant because Rudy is shown to just pick up anything and put it in his mouth if it looks edible. And he's like, no, don't eat that. So it really makes you wonder what the hell is in these cookies. And she gets very insistent, but Rudy makes excuses and pulls Jack towards the back door. And this whole creepy character, she reminds me of Snowpiercer, that school scene with the teacher who's just so bright and cheery, it's almost wrong. reminds me of that. And I actually say that Snowpiercer, I actually think of that movie as being like the closest thing we'll get to a Bioshock movie. And that's not a bad thing because Snowpiercer is great. But, moving on. But as Jack is being pulled towards the back door, he sees a picture of his dachshund Rusty on the wall. And he's freaking out and trying to get answers out of Mrs. Beasley. And she's saying, no, it's my dog. And Jack's saying, no, this is my dog. Why do you have a picture of it? But then he gets distracted because he hears they hear a little sister singing in the backyard. And Jack goes outside, and with encouragement from Rudy, he talks to the little sister, and she's drawing a chalk flower on the deck. And he talks about he's seen a real flower, and she goes, how? Like, she's like, they actually kind of start befriending each other, which is really cool. Like, I mean, it's really sweet and heartwarming, this scene. He asks her where he's pushing her on a swing, and they're talking, and it's really almost uncharacteristically nice of this. And she talks about how she lives with the doctor, a woman who takes good care of the sisters. So, from the games, that's Tenenbaum. And she's in the middle of inviting Jack to see the doctor when, bam, Rudy beats her brains in with a croquet mallet and kills her. And I'm like, a croquet mallet? Really? But, that is what it is. And so it's like, it's this really almost uncharacteristically nice scene to gut punch you at that moment. I love how that's written. And then he starts to harvest fluid from her neck with a hypodermic needle. That's when Jack gets pissed and starts screaming at him, asking why he killed her. And Rudy says, they're not children. They're little sisters created by Tenenbaum to secrete Adam. He's like, where do you think it comes from? What do you think people get it from? What do you think I'm doing? And that's when the Big Daddy shows up, roaring in anger and grief, and kills Rudy by slamming him into the house of the wall over and over again. Like, this is just really brutal. Like, damn. And it stands over the sister's body and moans in grief, and the traumatized Jack stands alongside it crying. And the way they juxtapose these two is actually really cool visual foreshadowing for something that happens in the game and happens later in the script. I'm not going to spoil it yet. And then it just looks at him, and in like a blind rage it attacks him, picking him up and throwing him so hard he crashes through the backdrop and into what's described as a backstage area. And the pursuit continues with Jack stumbling into the dance marathon again. And another thing Cthulhu Jack talks about this because he finds this chase scene in particular to go on for a while and not be very well described and vague. I like it a little bit more than he does, but I do agree it is kind of long and kind of vague. It could be a little bit more fleshed out and described. And I think the reason why it feels like it drags on longer than it actually does is because everything is described in like single sentences of description, like single sentence paragraphs of description. So it's like one sentence, and it takes up more pages than it should if you were using normal screenplay format. But instead, Logan has spaced it all out. And it just, sometimes he spaces it out and it works. Like in the baby carriage scene, he does that. And he does it a little bit in certain other places to drag out suspense. And here it just feels like he's doing it to do it. But in the dance marathon, Jack uses the shotgun he picked up, but the shots bounce off the diving suit exterior. So he runs again as it shoves and kills its way through the couples in the auditorium. And I just love how dangerous and deadly and unstoppable the Big Daddy is, because they build these things up as being really badass and you end up killing like 15 of them throughout the game. And so I like this as a movie. It really sells the threat of these things. And Jack runs back into the suburbia area and into Mrs. Beasley's house, where he grabs a Tommy gun he saw earlier. And he runs back into the street, starts firing at the daddy, but once again the bullets just bounce off it harmlessly. And Jack then flees through the backyards of the houses, passing through Beasley's yard as he goes, and he gets a glimpse of her harvesting the sister's corpse, which is a nice little creepy moment. And he then spots a doorway hidden in the backdrop and runs through it, finding himself in the vending machine corridor again. And then Jack gets an idea and he runs towards the clown vending machine and he dives to the floor as he leads the Big Daddy past the electronic eye, where it gets shredded and killed by the turrets. So yeah, that's a nice way to end it. And then Jack then gets a look inside the helmet, seeing a hideous mutation of a man melded with the machinery inside the suit. And you never actually see that in the games. You never see what the Big Daddy actually looks like inside, but you do know they've been melded to the suit. Like, you do know that's something that's happened, that they're never getting out of it. And you get the idea that they look horrible on the inside, but you never actually see it. So I like, that's a nice thing to put in the movie, especially how much of a horror movie this thing has been. Putting that visual in there, cool idea. And so that's the end of the chase scene. So Jack stumbles back into the suburban area and, trying to find his way, enters another of the houses from the back. And he's passing through the dining room and is about to head to the front door when he stops and looks around, realizing that he's in his dining room, exactly the same as the one in his dinner scene flashback from earlier. And that reminds me of, if you've not seen Annihilation, the Alex Garland movie with Natalie Portman. You have quite a few early scenes in her house, and you see the front hall quite a bit. And then when they're going through the Shimmer area, they're in an abandoned town, and they go inside the house for the night, and the front hall is exactly the same as the front hall of her house. That's just so mind-bending, and it reminds me of that a little bit. And then he moves towards an adjoining room, and he gets this sense of fear come over him. He doesn't want to enter the room, but he does. And he finds a filthy medical experiment room, which contains a restraining chair, surgical tools, 16 millimeter film camera, and it's like a projector too, and electroshock equipment. So this is what he got glimpses of earlier in those visions. Then he finds a wall covered in pictures of different people, places, and things. And most shocking of all, a picture of his parents, and the Barcelona postcard is there too. And he sinks down against the wall, overwhelmed by what he has just seen. So we're getting more of the reveal. So you're going, what the fuck is going on here? And we're getting this reveal that Jack is from Rapture a little bit earlier than we do in the game, but I think it works here. In the game, you start getting like hints towards that because you start getting flashes of images of his parents and of his house at random points in the game, and it's like, what's that? So we're kind of building on what the game does, and we're sort of building up to it, and we get the scene where he walks into that room. And I don't think you ever actually see that room in the first game, but it's kind of cool. I like that they do that here. And so Jack then hears Atlas calling for him, at first thinking that the voice is in his head. Before exiting the house to meet him, he starts freaking out about what he's learned and even mentions that Steinman recognized him. And this alarms Atlas, who asks if Jack mentioned Neptune's bounty, fearing that Steinman told Ryan about it. They then rush through the corridors to get to Neptune's bounty, which is the fish market of Rapture, and that's a level from the game. And they enter a secret door where they find Ryan's hovering security drones from the game assaulting the submarine. Jack catches a glimpse of a woman and boy, presumably Atlas's wife and child, inside the porthole of the small vessel, and can only watch helplessly as the drones sink the subs, sending them to their deaths. So we're adapting a scene from the game, only instead of sinking in the game, it blows up. And a grief-stricken Atlas tells Jack that Ryan has the answers he's seeking and asks him, would you kindly kill the son of a bitch after he gives them to you? And Atlas is kneeling there in the place as it slowly floods, seemingly overcome by grief, and Jack leaves. Picks up a shotgun from a dead body, makes his way to Ryan, the drone standing aside to let him pass, and doors in his way automatically opening up, because the idea is that Ryan is, wanting to let him through. And he passes through the park bubble again, looking up at Ryan's lit-up penthouse through the dome as he goes, and even scares off two splicers as he walks by. That's how determined he looks. Jack makes his way to the Olympus Heights building where the doors open up to let him in, and he rides an elevator up to Ryan's penthouse. So Olympus Heights, that's one of the late game areas where you're in that really long fetch quest, and that's where, the rich people all live. But instead of, so they've taken, this Andrew Ryan confrontation, which is in Hephaestus, the power station, and they've moved it here. And I think that, it doesn't bother me at all that they did this, but, okay. But but it is a change that's worth pointing out. He finds Ryan there who's putting golf balls across a carpet into a glass. And Ryan asks him if he possesses imagination, but Jack just wants to know what's going on. And Ryan says to imagine Rapture the way he planned it, the way he started. It was magnificent, he says, before they corrupted it. And then they took his ultimate creation, his son, and sent him back as a slave. And then Ryan asks him if he is a man or a slave, which is him basically saying that Jack is his son, which, plot twist, is actually from the game. Which it's a point in the game that you can actually miss if you're not paying attention to all the audio diaries, but it is there. So that means that Jack's last name is Jack Ryan, but I'm an analyst. I can't go to Yemen. And I'm so sorry about that. Thank Twitch for running that ad 100,000 times when that show was coming out. And he says that a man has a choice, and that's what separates a man from a slave. And he asks Jack if Jack has a choice. And Jack says he does. Ryan tells him to kindly drop his gun, and Jack does. He gives a series of instructions, all preceded by would you kindly. Run to the window, run to the bar, smash a glass, etc. All preceded by it's all preceded by the phrase would you kindly, finally telling him to freeze. And Ryan then berates Jack, saying that he's not a man, just Atlas's puppet, and that his entire life has been a lie. We then get flashes of Jack's false past mixed with reality, and it's actually showing things like it's actually going from his mother in the opening to the baby carriage splicer, and then from his father to Ryan, and you get the golf club thing, which is a parallel. And then we get a flashback to Jack reading the note attached to his present on the plane, telling him to kindly open the present, and he opens the present, revealing a pistol, and he begins to methodically shoot everyone on the plane, including the stewardess and the pilots. And then we see Jack in Rapture, and the different places his trigger phrase appears. It's on those Scrabble tiles. It's written on the wall in one place. And then we see the 2 times Atlas used it to get him to use Adam and to get him to go to Ryan and kill the son of a bitch. And this leads into a flashback of Jack as a child in the medical room being forced to watch home movies and having the trigger phrase drilled into his head. And I like that this flashback is here because you get a flashback to that in this scene in the game. And it's this really creepy, almost subliminal image. It flashes past so quickly where you see just little child Jack hooked up to the electroshock equipment with the doctors surrounding him. And it's just chilling, that image. You can find it really easily. Like, damn. And we go back to the present day where Ryan tells Jack that his life was all a lie cooked up by Atlas and that his sole purpose is to kill him. And Ryan sort of sentimentally comments that he misses the son, and he orders Jack using the trigger phrase to make him pick up the golf club and beat him to death, which he does. So we get this scene from the game, despite his best efforts not to, because he's actually struggling not to do what the trigger phrase is making him do, but he's still doing it. I love that reaction because it perfectly gets the player's reaction to that scene in the game, because you're watching Jack just beat Ryan to death with this golf club and you're going, oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck. And you're putting a little bit of that into the game, and it makes sense for a character who realizes his life has all been a lie to be trying desperately not to be swayed by this trigger phrase. I think it's really good. And Atlas then comes on over the PA system saying that the scene in Neptune's bounty was all a bunch of play acting to help motivate Jack, so that wasn't really his family. That's part of the game too. And he confirms that Ryan was indeed Jack's father and tells Jack that he met his mother as well, the baby carriage woman. And that bit's a little clunky where he goes like, was he my father? Yes, he was. Did I have a mother? No shit, you had a mother, Jack. And the baby carriage woman, and I like that use of the baby carriage woman. And I like it because it's a nice little shorthand to show you both of Jack's parents, because the whole thing about his mother in the game is kind of complicated and wouldn't fit into a movie. And it's really weird too about selling the fertilized egg of Jack to the bad guys. And it's just really weird and wouldn't fit into a movie very well. And you can actually miss that stuff in the game. It's another thing you can miss if you don't pay attention to the audio diaries. Atlas then says that he loved and admired Ryan, but the man betrayed everybody in Rapture, and they can now all be free again, which is the point of Rapture, before ordering Jack to kill himself. This is where I gotta talk about the big change to this character, because I talked about it a bit earlier with the plasmids and stuff, and that there's this whole twist, because there's this whole thing in the history of Rapture that's been because it's been very simplified down, where because, Rapture in the game is the developers deconstructing the objectivism philosophy, because in the game, it's Andrew Ryan trying to create this utopia where there's this purely unregulated economy, and it's going to run the way he wants things to run. And then there's this guy Fontaine who shows up, who's a crook and a con man, and he games the system because Ryan won't intervene in the economy in any way. So he games the system to get on top. He uses his smuggling to do it, among other things. And he's the one who, finances the research into Adam and the plasmids, also that he can just exploit Rapture and make off with the money. And Ryan doesn't like that, so he turns against him, and that's, showing the flaws of the system and showing Ryan's hypocrisy, that Ryan doesn't like someone challenging him for supremacy economically in Rapture, where everyone can be bought out, even he can, and Fontaine can take control. So he sends people against Fontaine. Fontaine is apparently killed, and that's when Atlas rises up as the head of the resistance. And the part of the twist is that this Atlas guy that you've been following, who is apparently this revolutionary, he's really Fontaine in disguise, playing the system in a whole other way. And with Fontaine being gone from this script, it kind of, guts the deconstruction of objectivism. But that's something that's gone from the script as well, because the objectivism thing isn't really here per se, because they focused in on the free will theme, which is displayed by the whole "would you kindly" trigger phrase. They focused in on that as the theme of the movie, which is a smart idea because it's a good thing to discuss and a good thing to focus in on. So the objectivism thing kind of falls by the wayside. So there is no Fontaine. So on the one hand, it feels a little bit watered down to me in the script, but it's also just a change in focus. And I'm not sure entirely how I feel about the lack of Fontaine, because my first reading, I was like, why did they get rid of that? And the second reading, I was paying attention to what they were doing with the free will thing. And they talk about that as it goes along in the script. Like, we'll get to that eventually. And it's one of those things that I feel kind of off about adaptation wise, but on the other hand, it sort of makes sense with what Logan and Verbinski are doing here. But I'm a little iffy on that. I'm still a little iffy on that. I don't know how I feel, but I think it works as the script. But I feel like we've liked a little bit more of that from the game pulled in. And Jack tries to fight the conditioning, but he still brings the gun up to his head. And by the way, Atlas saying, "Oh, shoot yourself," is a much better order to give than what Fontaine does in the game, where he goes, "Go get stepped on by a big daddy," where it's like, why wouldn't you just tell him to shoot himself? Because in this scene, he doesn't even tell him anything. He just says, "Oh, I'm going to leave you here to get killed by some security drones. Like, I'm not going to make you freeze in place or anything." The script does one thing better than the game. And I also like Andrew Ryan's characterization in this scene a little bit more than in the game, because I like that he is actually somewhat regretful of what has happened. Like, there's a little bit more depth to him just being a crazy paranoid psycho like he has become by this point. But yeah, to get back to the script. He brings the gun to his head, only to have his hand pulled away by a little sister who leads him down a tunnel into darkness. And it actually fades into black and holds on it for a little while, which I think is a really cool visual. And he awakes sometime later in a makeshift surgery that looks like an unfinished part of Rapture. And watching over him is Dr. Tenenbaum, who says that she has taken out the control mechanism. And he has little stitches on his head, so apparently the trigger phrase is controlled by a literal machine that was in his brain, which is a little bit weird when you think about it. And given him back the ability to choose, and she demonstrates this by using the trigger phrase, which now does nothing. And he gets kind of angsty about this and the fact that his life was nothing but a lie, and she tells him that it's real now, and that you can make choices that will have consequences. So we get Tenenbaum from the games here, finally, who is pretty much as she was. They don't really go into her Holocaust history and how she was one of the people in the camps who ended up working with the Nazis on their experiments, which is just, ugh. But, you know, it's not here in the script, but I mean, you can kind of assume certain things. Maybe it would have been nice to maybe work that in a rewrite. I don't know. But she talks about her choices and their consequences to Jack, and she shows him a tank full of sea slugs, which produced an enzyme with promising restorative properties, which that's basically what became Adam, and that's how she got it in the game as well, as it was a sea slug. And they needed a living incubator, though, to make enough of it, and that's where the Little Sisters came from. So she used She used the Little Sisters as the incubator for the slugs to mass produce the atom, which is from the games as well. And it was, she was doing it for Fontaine in the games, but I guess you can assume that it was, part of Ryan Industries here. And so she shows Jack a massive stockpile of the syringes that are all full, and she explains how at first Adam was like a miracle. It made the people who used it better. It basically perfected humanity. It made them, the perfect, physical version of humanity. And then people started taking more and more of it, trying to put past that perfection, and they became worse, creating the splicers. They tried to approach godhood, is the idea that she gives. And they then walk through the next room, a workshop for big daddies, full of inactive ones as well as parts. And she says that Rapture was her and Ryan's experiment into the potential of humanity. And then says that she tried to save as many Little Sisters as she could and made the daddies for that purpose. So keep the Little Sisters from getting killed by splicers in the Civil War, they needed to protect her, and so that's what the big daddies were made for. And this is where I should say there is no Dr. Sue Chong in this script, which is a shame because that guy is a really creepy sociopath and also kind of funny and entertaining to listen to. And I mean, he was a posthumous character in the game anyways, but, it's kind of a shame he's not in this. And they then enter a small, cobbled-together schoolroom where the 6 remaining Little Sisters are, and she tells Jack that Atlas has rounded up the rest and begun harvesting them en masse. And Tenenbaum, she goes about caring for them like a mother, saying that she tries to do what's best for them, but that Atlas has become a monster, and with him in control of the city, they don't have much time left. And so the idea that even Atlas, who was resisting Ryan's oppression, has become a monster himself, that's an interesting idea. And the basic idea that's the consequence of Rapture, even a good man, I guess, in this version, was corrupted eventually. We could use a little bit more detail on that. And she talks about how she has this newfound religious belief because with the things she's seen, she feels like she doesn't have any other choice. And she talks about how Rapture, it removed all shackles from man and made them truly free, and they became evil. And she talks about how in the hunter-gatherer days, people, they were held in check by the threat of, wild animals. And then eventually, it was laws and religious codes and social mores. That was what made them that was what kept them in line, and that the idea of Rapture is that it was supposed to be a place free of those sorts of restrictions to see humanity reach its full potential, and that without those restrictions, they mainly just went bad. So that's what Rapture is in this. It's not objectivism, it's this experiment into the ultimate free will, which is interesting. I would have liked a little bit more information about that, because it feels like we're getting an incomplete picture of how Rapture functioned. But I mean, it is still a really intriguing direction to take, and it sets itself apart. And it's just not as deep or as well constructed as the objectivist idea from the game was. Tenenbaum tells Jack that he should leave, explaining that they're living in the quarters of the city's construction crew, which were outfitted with escape pods because early on in the construction, it was fraught with danger, and so they needed an exit plan. And she says she won't take the sisters out as they can't be cured, and she doesn't want to expose the outside world to them. And that's the difference from the game, because in the game, she's created a plasmid, which allows you to rescue the little sisters from their conditioning and, cure them, essentially. And that's not here. Because, that's the moral choice mechanic of the game, is that you can either harvest the little sisters and kill them, or cure them and get less at them. And so that's taken out, which is even more interesting. Like, it makes you really think about this situation a lot more. And she plans to look after them until Atlas kills her and takes them from her, as that's all she can really do. And she does what she has to. That's her choice. And Jack heads for the pod and is about to take one when he sees a yellow chalk drawing of a flower on the wall opposite, like the one drawn by the little sister in Beasley's yard. And he finally makes a choice of his own and decides to stay, injecting himself with syringe after syringe of Adam. And Tenenbaum tells him that this will kill him, but he replies that it takes a monster to kill one. And Jack gets outfitted with Big Daddy armor and is painfully melded into the suit piece by piece. So this is from the game. Jack becomes a Big Daddy, and you have to wander around the fucking level finding all the pieces. That's part of the really long escort quest. I mean, the really long fetch quest. And he blacks out and then comes to in the new getup, and he briefly touches hands with one of the sisters and then sets off in search of Atlas. So yeah, this is moving towards the end. So this is something that you actually see, like, a lot of the concept art of the Big Daddy is of scenes of, if you read the script, it's of Jack in the Big Daddy suit. And what's interesting about that is that the concept art is almost exclusively of the bouncer type Big Daddy, which is the one that's on the cover of the game with all the little green portholes all over it, and has the drill. And the way the Big Daddies are described in this, the helmet sounds almost more like the Rosie type of Big Daddy, which has like the big diver's helmet and it has a rivet gun. But here, instead of the rivet gun, it has a drill. So the way it's described, it's almost like a melding of the two designs. But in the concept art, it's all just bouncer. And I can understand why, because the bouncer is the iconic Big Daddy. It's the one that all the merchandise of Big Daddies is made out of. I mean, you don't really see too much Rosie merchandise, but if you get any kind of Big Daddy merchandise, it's a bouncer. So I can kind of understand why they would go in that direction. And he descends through Rapture's levels before finding himself in a corridor lined with cages, and there is concept art of this, which it's not the one I used, but it's there. Of corridor lined with cages, which are stuffed full of little sisters who are hooked up to IDD tubes that harvest the atom while they are still alive. And he reaches the end of the tunnel, and he breaks off the lock of one of the cages, and the sister inside that one starts freeing the rest. And then Jack then trudges on and finds himself in Rapture's central power station, which is basically Hephaestus from the games. It's just been repurposed for this. And instead of being full of like pipes and heat lofts and that stuff, it's full of dynamos. And he finds Atlas sitting on a crate with an IV hooked to his neck, pumping Adam into him from a vast web of tubes, which is all draining from the little sisters. And you're sitting there thinking, how much has he possibly taken on this constant drip feed? And this is another image that's in the concept art, and it is by, let me make sure I get this name right, Khosra Farahani. This is an image which I use because it reflects a scene from the script, so that's in the thumbnail, both on YouTube and on Spreaker. And so it's Atlas sitting on a crate getting the injection of the atom. And he's described as almost being, like, unimpressive. Like, it's almost like, oh, we find the devil himself, and it's just this guy. And Atlas lectures Jack, telling him that the Big Daddy suit doesn't give him power, at least not compared to what Adam is going to give him. And he turns off the flow of Adam and unhooks the IV, approaching Jack, saying that he now has the power of choice. Atlas then accuses Jack of making his choice to sacrifice himself for the sisters, not for them, but for his own gratification. And I like that. That's a really interesting moral question, much more so than, are you a child killer or are you not? It's, are you making this heroic choice to help these people or to make yourself feel better. So it's a really interesting implication there. And he asks him if Jack took enough Adam to become a god, and then tells him that he found the place where he belongs, Rapture. And Jack tells Atlas to kindly shut the fuck up and rams his big daddy drill into his body, shredding him. And I love that because you just want to tell Fontaine by the end of the game, Atlas here, but you want to tell Fontaine to just kindly shut the fuck up because he loves to talk. And that's one advantage to not having Fontaine in this adaptation, is that you don't have to fucking listen to him ramble on and refer to Tenenbaum as Mother Goose over and over and over again in that fucking Bronx accent. Because he switches from the Irish accent to the Bronx accent when he takes on his original identity again. It's just like, shut up. You just get so sick of this guy talking and talking and talking by the end. But Atlas isn't dead, and he isn't even in pain, saying he's gone beyond law, reality, and even his own body. And Jack flings him off his drill, and he watches as the wound heals rapidly as if nothing happened at all. And Atlas concentrates, making his arm mutate and stretch. Like, it's not like Mr. Fantastic stretching. It's like the muscles in the bones are literally cracking and reshaping as he moves it, as he makes it stretch out. It sounds really painful and body horror-y and just, ugh. And I like how it's described, and that's not a power you get in the game, by the way. And flinging it out at Jack and knocking him into a dynamo. And he then brings his arm back, and his entire body begins to crack, shift, and mutate. He keeps mutating and shifting as Jack fights him, but Jack is unused to the suit and gets knocked around a lot until the suit's connections to his body get jarred loose and he begins to lose control. And Atlas then starts building up electrical energy with himself, shooting it out of his hands at Jack several times until his suit is scorched and broken and Jack is dying. And so this is basically the game's version of the plasmids. Basically, the idea here is that the atom, if you use enough of it, you eventually can basically like reshape your body and do anything with it that you want. You can gain these powers. I feel like there should have been a little bit more foreshadowing to this, because you get like the one billboard for plasmids early on, and then you get Tenenbaum talking about how people tried to push themselves beyond the human and become godlike, and Atlas talking about how he's now become the god and god beyond everything. You could use a little bit more build up to that. Maybe have like a splicer that has like a plasmid, like it shoots the electricity or something like that. Maybe have a little bit of that earlier on as like a little bit of foreshadowing. But I mean, I'm still cool at this because this is a way better fight than the final boss fight against Fontaine in the game, because there he has a bunch of different powers, and apparently taking a shitload of Adam into you turns you into one of those fucking dickless statues from the cover of an Ayn Rand book. Yeah, it's just a little too, I mean, the whole objectivism thing is really well done in the game, but that visual at the end is just a little too on the nose. And also it's interesting to note that in the game, it's specified that Atlas Fontaine has not, I think it's specified he hasn't spliced at all up until right at the end. So that's a difference in the game. And then he gets addicted to it immediately and just wants it all and just pumps it all into himself. And so Jack begins to rev up his drill, and Atlas moves in for the kill, only for Jack to drill open the glass dome instead, hitting the electrified Atlas with water and stunning him. And that's when the little sisters that Jack freed before show up, viciously jamming needles into Atlas and harvesting the Atom from him until he dies, that's how he goes out in the game as well. And the cracking the dome thing doesn't happen, but he does get sworn by the little sisters and harvested to death, which is just nasty, but he totally deserves it, especially since he was behind creating them in the first place in the games. That's not here, but so that irony is gone. It is what it is. And they move towards Jack and take his hand as he is about to die, and he has a vision of heaven where he's on a grassy hill with his dog Rusty and two little sisters, and everyone is happy, and it's almost too sweet and saccharine for words. But then Jack wakes up again in Tenenbaum's surgery as the doctor has beat the odds and managed to save him, and he's apparently out of his big daddy suit, which I don't like that. That's one thing I find way too convenient about the good ending of the game, is that he apparently was able to go up to the surface and live a normal life despite the fact that he became a big daddy, which is supposed to be irreversible. But what do I know? I'm a fish. I'm a bear. I suck the heads off fish. What do I know? He says he was supposed to die. That was his choice, and he's really upset about his free will getting taken away again as he sees it. And Atlas was just a man, not a monster, and that for a moment Jack knew how he felt, and I think you're meant to think that he knew what it felt like to be a god. And Tenenbaum tells him to be calm and that the children are safe, but Jack says they're not. And his arm stretches like Atlas is, and he strikes her dead, splattering her blood on the little sisters, and then goes to an exterior shot of Rapture with the escape pod shooting to the surface, As Jack monologues over the PA system saying that he wants to carry on his father's legacy, we see the splicers from the pods overpowering the crew of a nuclear submarine. And Jack continues saying that both Ryan and Atlas thought too small that Rapture must be brought to the world. And we see the splicers on the submarine approaching one of the nuclear missiles, and they're almost like in religious awe of it. And that reminded me of Beneath the Planet of the Apes, which is a crazy fucking movie. And that's where it ends. So this script definitely goes for the bad ending. But it almost makes it even more fucked up because he kills Tenenbaum, which thankfully means we don't have to hear her moralize at the end. So John Logan definitely decided he wanted to go for the bad ending on this one. And I do think at a glance, it does seem like Jack is kind of thinly motivated for turning against Tenenbaum like that and turning against the Little Sisters. But, you do get the foreshadowing with the whole thing about how, like, if you truly free someone and give them the powers of a god, they are evil. They become evil. And the fact that the implication that Jack made his decision to sacrifice himself and save everybody purely for his own gratification so he could make a choice, do a choice that made him feel better, that does kind of lead up that Jack is not going to be morally upstanding and the perfect surrogate father that he is in the games. In the game's good ending, at least. And the fact that, he wants this free will, he wants to be able to choose for himself, and the fact that Tenenbaum takes that choice away from him, between that and getting, the glimpse of the godlike powers and, him, the selfish choice, essentially, that basically breaks him, and that's what makes him become this person at the end, become more than Atlas, more than Ryan, even worse. I feel like you could work on that a little bit, but I think it is a workable ending. And it's fucking ballsy as hell that Gore Verbinski wanted to make a big budget movie with this kind of ending to it. Like, damn. So yeah, that's the script. I would say on the whole, I really, really, really like. And I think it's one of the best unproduced video game adaptations that there is. And I do think that, like, there's a couple things you could fix here and there, like trimming some things, focusing in on some things a little bit more, maybe explaining a little bit more about, the free will experiment of Rapture, because it doesn't feel anywhere near as developed as the objectivism is in the game. And that's a bit of a problem. Nip and tuck a few things there, maybe work Fontaine back in. Somehow, maybe, that might, require a little bit more rewriting. But I do think it's overall a very good script. And the reason this didn't happen was sadly because of budget. Universal put the project on hold in April 2009 over budget concerns. And apparently the specific reason why they had these budget concerns was because it was R-rated. The budget was at $160 million. According to some sources, it was $200 million. And Watchmen had just come out, which was an expensive R-rated movie, and bombed. And so Universal got cold feet over that. So they either wanted a PG-13 or a lower budget, and they wanted to target $60 million. They wanted to target $80 million instead of $160. And Gore Verbinski wanted to whittle it down, and eventually he left and he decided to focus on being a producer, because one of the ways of getting the budget down was to shoot overseas instead of in the US, and he didn't want to leave because he was working on Rango in LA. And so that was a thing, so he decided to produce it instead. And Juan Carlos Fresnadillo of 28 Weeks Later, most notably, and he also popped up in the last episode, so nice little symmetry there. It fucking rhymes. So he signed on to direct, and Ken Levine, who had been very closely working with Gore Verbinski and was getting along with him, he didn't quite have the same rapport with Juan Carlos Fresnadillo. They weren't clashing or anything, but he just didn't mesh with him as well. And on top of that, and the PG-13 pressure, and Universal wanting to cut the budget down way down by almost half, they asked him, we're going to give you the choice to, keep this going or kill it now. And he decided to kill it then in around 2013, 2014. And that was it for the Bioshock movie. And there's been some rumblings of development here and there. Like apparently Sony wanted to make it, and they tried to, buy up certain website domains, but nothing came of that. And thank God, because I don't want Sony to get their hands on it, because they can't even, from what we've seen of the Uncharted movie so far, Sony can't even, figure out the stuff they already own. So yeah. But yeah, it would be interesting too. And of course, I can kind of understand Universal's position, because not only were R-rated movies bombing, but their own movies that were even PG-13 weren't doing that well. Like Incredible Hulk underperformed. And that's one hell of a what could have been situation. Can you imagine if Hulk had been the big success instead of Iron Man? The MCU would look completely different. But that's a thing. And all the stuff that they were putting money into was failing, including including The Wolfman, which was a big R-rated film, and that only failed because they inflated the budget with reshoots and they kept delaying it, and then they dumped it out in February on Valentine's Day. Who's the fuck is going to go see a werewolf movie on Valentine's Day? But yeah, that movie failed. That movie was a bomb, and that was what kind of killed the whole idea of the R-rated movie for Universal, was that movie. And so they started like pulling back on things, and that's why we got stuff like Dracula Untold and The Mummy 2017, was because Universal was like, we can only make PG-13 action movies now because that's all that makes money. But yeah, it's a shame this fell apart, because I feel like with just a little bit more work, they were 8 weeks away from shooting, and there was I don't know what any of the actual casting was. I know Wentworth Miller's name was thrown around for Jack, but I don't know if that was ever official. But no, I mean, it's a shame. I think this would have been a really good movie if Universal would have just had a little bit more faith in it. But yeah, I think I've talked this to death. I think this is one of the missed opportunities in terms of video game movies. This and Avery's Castle Wolfenstein are right at the top of that for me. Others I like. Epic Candle didn't like it, but I like the Macedon Zinman Tomb Raider script. I like the Brent Friedman Tomb Raider script. All of these scripts I think would have been good movies that just didn't get made for one reason or another, especially this and Wolfenstein. This and Wolfenstein are like top two. But yeah, Bioshock, really good script. I hope you enjoyed the episode. This went on way longer than my usual solo episodes do. Damn. But it was there was a lot to talk about here, and I just love the games wholeheartedly, so there was a lot to go into. And hopefully you liked it. And until next time, guys, bye.